John Harbaugh had some very interesting comments at the 2024 NFL owners meetings about the updated plans of the Baltimore Ravens. We talk about that and so much more. Coming up next on this instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcoming to another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, coming here to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thank you so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your shows. We're 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens, so Monday through Friday, plus these bonus content episodes, live streams. We're here for you if you want that daily Ravens coverage. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I wasn't really planning on doing this, but John Harbaugh did have a lot of really fascinating comments about what the Ravens' updated plans are. And obviously, again, it's press conference, some of it is coach speak, but there were very interesting things that John Harbaugh had to say, particularly about some of the Ravens' current free agents who are still on the board. So we're going to be talking about what John Harbaugh had to say, what it means for the Ravens. We'll talk a little bit more about what the Ravens have done this offseason, talk about the draft a little bit, but it'll mostly be centered around what John Harbaugh did have to say. We can talk about it, whether things are realistic, things aren't. So a lot of conversation to dive into. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in. I know it's a little Monday afternoon. If you're listening to this live, thank you for tuning in. And if you're listening after the fact too, we do have, for people who miss it, audio form. It's available after the fact and also video form too. Let's start off with what John Harbaugh had to say. And first of all, the thing that he had to say earlier was, and this is actually before anything happened, was that the hip drop tackle, that's a big piece of information for the NFL. It's banned. It's gone. The NFL has officially banned it, and I see Felix in the chat. What's up, Felix? Thank you for tuning in. But the hip drop is gone. Now, we know we kind of got introduced in Baltimore to that hip drop tackle, and again, it's been going on for years, right? But the big one last year was Mark Andrews getting hip dropped by Logan Wilson, effectively ending his regular season. He came back for the AFC Championship game, but that was a big tackle. And again, the NFL kind of it's in a tough spot because how else do you tackle nowadays, right? I mean, the defenders are already so limited in what they do. The hip drop is away, and it's not malicious, but it is a dangerous play. So the NFL trying to take out danger from defense, but they've already taken out so much. You know, former Raven Patrick Queen saying, well, now it's about to be two-hand touch. And John Harbaugh was actually in favor of them taking out the hip drop. So he said he's all for taking the hip drop out of the game. That's exactly what happened. So I know that's, it's controversial. It's a controversial topic. We'll talk more about it on Locked On Ravens as the week goes on. But yeah, it's, taking the hip drop, John Harbaugh said, is the right thing to do. So that was his stance on that. Now, he actually started off about Patrick Queen, saying he loves Patrick Queen. He's one of my all-time favorite people, says he's going to give him a hug before the next Ravens-Steelers game and will root for him, of course, except for when the Ravens play the Steelers. And that's just what this business is. Queen has made a lot of controversial comments about him being the villain and then walking it back. Not walking it back, but I guess he was like, can y'all stop now? Can you guys stop? That's essentially what he said. And it's caused a lot of controversy within the Ravens fan base, but John Harbaugh, much like Patrick Queen actually said during his press conference with the Steelers, his introductory one, he said, it's more so the fans than anybody else taking the rivalry part of it and him going to enemy lines. They've taken it they've taken it the hardest, essentially. But Harbaugh saying he still loves Patrick Queen, one of his favorite people, and also said that Trent Simpson is going to have an opportunity to replace Patrick Queen and said he's fully expected to play very well in that as well. Also said that he's very happy to have Chris Ward back, which does not shock me literally one bit. He's someone that is a special teams guy, and it makes sense that the Ravens were to bring that guy back. Delshon Phillips is now in Houston, and he was kind of their special teams linebacker, and the Ravens board has been a longtime member of the team. Went to Detroit, was kind of bouncing around a little bit, but now he's back. And it kind of feels like he never left, honestly, because Baltimore seems to always have one of those players on their roster. So that was really funny. But then he also talked about the young tight ends as well on the roster, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kolar, saying that them evolving is going to be a big part of what the Ravens do and what they want to do on the offensive side of the ball. So Isaiah Likely continuing what he's done in 2020, 2022, didn't really get a ton of opportunity, but 2023 when Mark Andrews went down, he stepped up in that tight end one role. And now, it was a question going into the AFC Championship game, right? It was, well, how are you going to utilize both Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely? And I don't think the Ravens had enough time with the current form or with that form that Isaiah Likely was in. They didn't have enough time to kind of experiment with Mark and Isaiah. I've seen a lot of trade Mark Andrews talk on social media too. That is bogus, by the way. I would not be trading Mark Andrews. I don't really know where that started, but I get Likely is a great player, but Andrews is a better player. So that to me is, we're just going to stop that right there. But I do agree with John Harbaugh on the fact that they need to involve their tight ends more. You can't just have Mark Andrews be your one guy. And look, Mark Andrews is your best tight end, but you can also utilize Isaiah Likely and Andrews in a lot of different ways. You can put Isaiah Likely in the slot. You can move Andrews around. You can even put these guys on the outside. They're that good of route runners. So I think, look, playing Andrews and Likely together just makes this offense even more dangerous, especially in heavier sets where you can work play action off of it with the Derrick Henry in the backfield. But it is going to be a big part of what they're doing. And Harbaugh also saying that they're going to be in good shape at wide receiver, give those young guys a chance to see how they do. This is what we talked about. I had a bonus episode about this on Saturday about the Ravens seemingly trusting Rashad Bateman, and John Harbaugh's comments most definitely kind of really drive that point home about, well, the Ravens aren't going to necessarily, and maybe they do. Again, some of this could be coach speak, and the Ravens are out there trying to trade for a number 2 guy put next to Zay Flowers. But with the visit of Michael Gallup and the visit of Josh Reynolds, those are players that don't take away from Rashad Bateman's role. They're players that will complement Bateman and will elevate Bateman. So again, we can agree or disagree with that decision. We'll have that conversation over the course of the offseason if people feel like Bateman's ready or not. But feels like to me, and feels like John Harbaugh's comments here saying that if they sign a guy, it's going to be a guy that does not take away from Bateman's role. It will be maybe a 3 to 4 guy instead of a 2 to 3 guy, which again, I think has some benefits and some drawbacks if you're the Ravens right now. Now, he also said that he'd be happy to bring back either J.K. Dobbins or Dalvin Cook back, but if it can't happen, he's confident in giving young guys an opportunity. Now, I don't really know who the young guys are. Keaton Mitchell obviously are going to give an opportunity regardless. Justice Hill is, I guess he's a young guy. Not necessarily so much anymore, but I whether the Ravens draft a young running back, I don't necessarily feel like, though, J.K. or Dalvin is going to be back. You have Derrick Henry in the fold now. Justice Hill is going to be a big part of your offense. And then you can either, honestly, it's kind of weird to say this, but I feel like there's a higher likelihood of Dalvin Cook coming back as opposed to J.K. Dobbins. I just feel like J.K. is going to be looking for a 1-year prove-it deal where he can get a somewhat sizable role and prove that, the injury stuff is behind him and he's able to perform at the level he played at during his rookie season. I just don't see that being in Baltimore, especially with Derrick Henry in the fold. He essentially is your 3rd running back, and then when Keaton comes back, he's probably your 4th. And I feel like that's really disrespectful to say, but it's just, I don't know. JK's not a 4th back. Like, he's really, really good. I don't want to disrespect JK by saying that. So I just don't feel like, in my opinion, the right fit for JK or the Ravens is a reunion. But I feel like for Dalvin, who it was a weird Dalvin tenure in Baltimore. I don't really know what that whole thing was. There was going to be a role, then there wasn't a role, and it just didn't work. And then they ran the ball 6 times with the running backs. But I feel like if you have Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, Dalvin Cook, and then when Keaton comes back, you can maybe slot Dalvin back into that 4th running back role. Honestly, I feel like that would be okay. But maybe the Ravens draft a running back. I would not be shocked if they do on day 3. That's where that's the earliest. We talked about that on today's Mock Draft Monday. You can go back and listen to that. I said the Ravens, 4th round on, I'm all right with it. You can do that if you're the Ravens. But 3rd round, 2nd round, 1st round, I'm not touching a running back with that as well. Now, also had some interesting things to say on Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy, saying that both guys, there's optimism for him that they'll both be back. Says he periodically texted with both players, but he's not sure about any timetable to sign. Now, based off of their timetables last year, we know that Clowney signed right about 3 or so weeks before the season started, and Kyle Van Noy signed about 3 weeks after the season started. So we might be waiting a while, and we know that Jadeveon Clowney doesn't necessarily love the offseason workout portion of it, so maybe he's waiting to go out there and sign a deal. Maybe it's different this offseason, but in my opinion, I'm not sure if that's going to be an anytime soon type of deal. And if you're the Ravens and there's not a guarantee that either of those guys come back for you, you might have to draft an edge higher than you might want to, or you might have to sign a veteran just as a contingency plan, because I think best case scenario, you get both Clowney and Van Noy back. I think they played really well last year and they brought a lot to the table. But at the end of the day, if their timelines are, okay, we're going to sign a month down the line or 2 months or even like 4 months down the line, and you aren't guaranteed to be that team, you have to have other plans in place. So we're going to see, and I see Cam saying on a Jabbo breakout would feed families. Yeah, I mean, look, that would help, wouldn't it? I mean, the reason why I think a lot of people are so worried about the edge position is because Odafe Owe has shown flashes, and he was solid last year, but hasn't had that true breakout. Ajabo's been injured. I mean, you can't put any trust. The potential's there, but you can't put any trust in him. Tavius Robinson played more than I thought he was going to, but again, you can't put trust that he's going to all of a sudden become this 10-sack guy next year. Clowney and Van Noy were your two most consistent pass rushers, your two most consistent edge players, with Owe being, I think, third. And if either of those guys can't come back, you really got to figure out another plan there as well. And I see Cam saying rather the Ravens draft a 5th, 7th round running back, use Justin and Mitchell Justin and Mitchell as a running back 2A and 2B, and then use Henry, but keep him healthy and ready to go for the playoffs. I think you meant Henry. Titans overused that, man. Yeah, the Ravens won't need to use Henry like the Titans did. 280 carries last year, average about 321 over his past 4 healthy seasons. You want to give the ball to your best running back, and that is Derrick Henry. You don't want to run him into the ground, though. There is a conversation to be had about that. Coming up, though, we'll talk a bit more about what John Harbaugh had to say, get into more comments. Also, if any free agents are going to be returning outside of the guys John Harbaugh mentioned, stay tuned. A lot to get to on this live instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens on Monday afternoon. First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney, whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1-seed. It's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Now, I have UConn winning it all. I don't know, if you're watching or listening. I don't know if your bracket's been very busted. Mine definitely has. I had BYU, I think, in the Elite Eight. I had Kentucky going far. It's been a mess, but Houston pulled out that game last night in overtime. So they're in my finals. I have a UConn-Houston final. So as long as UConn is still in it, I have at least a shot. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and bet college hoops until they cut down the nets. We're back our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher here with you live on Monday afternoon. Really appreciate everybody for being here, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We did come out with a Monday episode, as we do, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time. We had our mock draft Monday. The mock draft simulator, and that one was very generous. If you want to tune into that one and see who I was able to nab for Baltimore, and if you like it or not, you can tune into Monday's episode. But also, we do daily Ravens content 5 days per week, Monday through Friday, plus these live streams after every piece of Ravens big news and during the season after games. Also, bonus episodes on the weekends sometimes as well. It's audio, video, same show. So thank you for tuning in. Really appreciate all the support here, whether you're an everyday or it's your first time in or you're somewhere in the middle. Thank you. Let's keep talking about John Harbaugh, though. Keep talking about these comments. Now, John Harbaugh said in the interview Voorhees, there's a lot of conversation about the Voorhees component of the offensive line rebuild. John Harbaugh said Angel Voorhees will be good, or will be a full good when the offseason program starts. And that's a big one because I think a lot of people are excited about Angel Voorhees. Now, I'm not going to go and necessarily hand him the keys and say he's the second coming of Marshall Yanda or anything like that. But I do think there's a lot of potential. We'll see how he responds off of the injury, obviously towards ACL at the combine. And look, some players can bounce back from that better than others. It's just a matter of how you recover, how your body responds. So there's no guarantee Voorhees comes back and is as strong or as good, but there's also a possibility he comes back and he's just fine. It happens both ways. So we're going to have to see what it looks like. But with him, with Ben Cleveland, Josh Jones, Daniel Falele, Salah, Patrick McCary, they do have depth, but you want to add more. You want to have the competition. There's going to be a competition between Cleveland and Voorhees and all those guys. But with losing 3 starters, it's not just, we're filling left guard and that'll be that. I mean, that's what the Ravens essentially had to do last offseason with the left guard position, where Ben Powers leaves and the rest of your 4 were solid. And then it's like, okay, there are going to be like 3 or 4 guys competing for the left guard competition. Now there are going to be like 7 or 8 or 9 guys competing for 3 spots. That's a lot different. I'm not saying it's not going to work, but I mean, I'd assume the Ravens try to draft a plug-and-play tackle in round 1 or at the very least round 2, and then they kind of let the guard positions play out themselves. Maybe they'll draft a middle-round offensive lineman to throw in that competition as well. But I'd expect Ben Cleveland to probably get one of those spots, and then whether it's Voorhees or Saleh or a veteran, maybe Josh Jones wins it. That's probably where I would expect the other one to be. But in terms of the actual backup quarterback position, moving on, John Harbaugh says he expects Josh Johnson to be the backup quarterback, but he's excited to see how Malik Cunningham looks. This might have been a bit of a shock to some people, where I don't think it was going to be a case closed this early in the offseason. Now, it's not. Obviously, if Malik Cunningham comes in and performs really, really well, you obviously have a different conversation about what's going on in terms of, does Cunningham overtake Josh Johnson? But I would probably anticipate a lot of people expected it to be Lamar 1, Malik Cunningham 2, and Josh Johnson 3. But, I think the veteran leadership and the veteran aspect of Josh Johnson, Malik Cunningham being a relative unknown, it's not that Cunningham isn't talented. That's why the Ravens brought him in. But with the Ravens, if Lamar were to go down, would you trust a veteran like Josh Johnson more, or would you trust the unproven talented player in Malik Cunningham more? I don't necessarily disagree with Harbaugh putting Josh Johnson ahead for now, but obviously there's a lot of training camps still to go. In fact, there's all the training camps still to go, OTAs, etc. A lot of time for Malik Cunningham to prove himself. Speaking of David Ojabo, I know Cam made that comment earlier. David Ojabo to John Harbaugh, said that Ajabo's healthy, expects him to break out this year. I sure hope so. And that's what Cam was talking about with the Ojabo breakout. They need it. They really do, especially if one of a guy like Clowney or Van Noy can't come back and they only bring back one and they decide not to bring back another veteran or bring in another veteran. Ojabo is going to be key for what the Ravens need. We've seen those flashes. We've seen that potential, but you can't bank everything on potential. He has to stay healthy, first of all. And for Ojabo, him coming in, it was always he was going to need a little bit more time to kind of learn some of the nuances of the game. He hasn't been playing football for all that long. Now, of course, being in a professional organization like Baltimore for 2 years, learning from guys like a Justin Houston and Clowney and Van Noy and just watching how they work, that's helped. He's sat back and he's watched. But now it's about going out on the field, staying healthy and contributing. If they can't get that from him and they only bring back Clowney and they have Clowney, Owe, and Ojabo, that's going to be tough as they don't bring in another quality edge rusher on top of that, because you want to be at least 3 deep at that position and have 3 guys who you can essentially trust. And right now, if they bring back a Van Noy or a Clowney, those guys are in the circle of trust. Owe, I think he's either barely in or right outside it. I think you still trust him, though, based off what he did last year. But other than that, there's no one in your circle of trust. And I think that's going to be really important for Baltimore to establish over the course of the season. And hopefully Ojabo can work his way in there. Now, as usual, John Harbaugh said that Lamar Jackson has told the organization about a few of the wide receivers he likes coming into the draft. So we know that he had opinions on Zay Flowers last year, really liked Zay, and a lot of those South Florida receivers, Tank Dell, another one of those guys who would have looked really nice in a Ravens uniform, but he went to Houston. So Lamar gives input, and I think this is the right thing to do. Every organization should do this. I think most do, but I don't think every organization does it. Lamar should have input on the offense. Lamar should have input on personnel, not to the point where he is making the personnel decisions, but he can say, hey, look, this is who I think would really fit my skill set. If it's not this guy, I think someone along these lines would work. It's not Lamar taking over Eric DeCosta's job, right? It's just him and Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh working together as a unit, as a tandem, instead of one guy saying, well, yeah, I want this guy, and if I don't get him, I'm going to be mad. No, that's not how Lamar operates. Even last offseason, he said, look, I'd love to play with DeAndre Hopkins. I'd love to play with Odell Beckham Jr. He literally name-dropped those 2 guys. And what happened? Eric DeCosta went out there, and he got a guy in Odell Beckham who, again, I know it wasn't necessarily the production based off the contract that everybody wanted, but that was a message to Lamar at the time that said, hey, look, we'll go get you your guy, right? We believe in you. We believe in what your philosophy is and what you believe for yourself. We're going to see what ends up happening this offseason, obviously with Lamar in a contract, but I'm sure Eric DeCosta will take those suggestions and have him as something in his back pocket for sure. Now, for John Harbaugh, also about Daniel Falele, he'll get a shot to win the right tackle job, but also said that saner heads have prevailed and Patrick Ricard will be staying at fullback and not moving to the offensive line. So I don't know where that agenda came from. It kind of pops up every year where you move Ricard to the offensive line and you put Ben Mason or another fullback in that role. It seems to pop up every offseason. And of course, it never prevails every offseason. So good on the Ravens and John Harbaugh for not caving into whatever agenda that is. Falele will have a shot to win it, though. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, it will probably be a plug-and-play tackle. You take it 30, and that'll be that. And if that's the case, if the Ravens draft a tackle at 30, there's no way that guy's not playing, whether it is on the outside or on the inside. The Ravens are in a spot right now, competitive-wise, where you can't afford to have your first-round pick sit for a year. Whether it's behind a Ronnie Stanley or behind whoever wins the left guard job, you can't afford that. The first-round pick is too valuable, and you get too talented of a player to have a guy sit for a season. There are specific roles that guys can play, right? A wide receiver isn't playing 100% of snaps, or a corner's not playing 100% of snaps, but you can't just have an offensive lineman sit for a year if you draft him at 30 with what ends up happening with that. So that to me is a little bit interesting in terms of, for Baltimore, what their competitions are going to look like and who wins those. But just because they draft a guy doesn't mean he automatically wins the job. He has to earn it. But I'd be shocked if they draft a tackle or an offensive lineman at 30 and they don't end up starting him. So that's interesting. Harbaugh saying the Ravens are in a tight cap situation. The Morgan Moses trade was a tough decision for them, but it was just being too tight against the cap and needing that flexibility. I think ideally they would have liked to keep Morgan Moses. He was solid, but also he's 33. He's a little older. And I think that Baltimore, he kind of mentioned that he didn't really know. He was talking to Derrick Henry a little bit before. So I think Baltimore in an ideal world would have kept him, but I think the plan for Baltimore is to get younger and more athletic, because the thing I've talked about is not only did Todd Monken inherit the Greg Roman offense, Not only did Todd Monken inherit the Greg Roman offense, he inherited the offensive line. He inherited the personnel. And so maybe Todd Monken's version of what the offensive line looks like is a little different than what Greg Roman, who again had those tough road graders and those guys who can get out into space and work, but aren't necessarily the most athletic guys. And now Todd Monken can come in and kind of put his own personal touch on what he believes the offensive line can be there. And Sashi Brown also, we'll talk about this a tiny bit at the top of the third. So let's save it for that, actually. We'll save it for the top of the third segment, and then we'll get into comments as well. Coming up, we'll talk about what Sashi Brown, the Ravens team president, had to say about the Ravens potentially hosting a draft down the line, and a lot more. Stay tuned, planning to talk about on this live edition of Locked On Ravens. We're back, our final segment of Locked On Ravens Live. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Monday afternoon. Really appreciate everybody here for tuning in today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Again, free and available, all podcasting platforms. So if you're an audio listener, you like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we're there for you. Also on YouTube and video form, we have all of our content over there. Same show, both audio and video. We're 5 days a week, no matter what, even in the low periods of the offseason. So we get to after the draft in May, June, we still do 5 days a week. This morning's episode was episode 1,211 consecutively for me. Let's talk about what Sashi Brown had to say about the Ravens possibly hosting a draft, calling Baltimore an attractive destination, and saying that the Ravens have expressed interest to the league in hosting a draft. And also there's going to be a ticket price increase this year. The Ravens continue on that every other year increase plan. So that's not necessarily a shock, but also there are potentially alternate uniforms that are going on, which is really interesting too. It did say the organization feels the team has maintained a classic look with its main home road jerseys. Doesn't plan to tinker with those, but maybe another option, which I think a lot of people want the helmets. I think a lot of people want a different helmet or an alternative helmet. A lot of teams have started to do that recently. But hey, the Ravens have made a ton of big uniform changes in recent years. I think that would be personally really exciting. But hey, you know what? If they bring out a helmet before the uniforms, I'm really excited to see what it will look like for them. Now, in terms of comments here, I know we got a lot from Cam. We'll get to Cam, your comments. Also, we got Comps Master Caliente here. So let's see. Cam says, curious if the Ravens use the fifth-year option on Oweh or Bateman, or both or neither, if they draft a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds. I expect he's Bateman's replacement. I wouldn't say replacement, but I do think in an ideal, if everything went right for Baltimore, if they were to draft a receiver, let's say they draft a first-round wide receiver. Let's say Adonai Mitchell's there, Xavier Worthy's there, Keon Coleman, etc. They draft a guy like that. Or, Cam says first 3 rounds, maybe Jalen Polk or Malachi Corey, whoever. Ideally, all 3 of your guys succeed and you pay them all big money. But can you afford to pay 3 wide receivers big money? I mean, the Ravens are going to have to pay Zay if everything works out, right? I mean, there's no doubt about it. If Bateman works out, they're going to have to pay him a decently sized chunk considering the wide receiver contracts are kind of going. What you can do, though, is you can pay both Bateman and Flowers, then have your rookie this year on a contract for 4 years, and you can make the decision between a Bateman or that rookie come 4 or 5 years down the line. So things have changed, I still think they declined Bateman's option. But at the same time, the wide receiver market is so lucrative now. I mean, we just saw Calvin Ridley get 4 for 92 or 93. Gabe Davis got 3 for 39 or something like that. So the receiver market is very, very lucrative. I wouldn't be shocked if the Ravens see that and say, well, getting Bateman on like a $14 million option. If he breaks out, he's going to earn a lot more than that. So maybe they do it, but they also declined Queen's option last year. My prediction, though, is still they pick up Oways and they decline Bateman's and just kind of see how it works out. They can always re-sign him to a longer-term deal, but we'll kind of see what happens with that one. And then Cam saying, do you think the greatest loss of the season was still Mike McDonald? I agree Manabike would have been, but the Ravens retained him. I'd argue Mike McDonald leaving for Seattle is more important than any individual. Yeah, I'd say so. I think you're right, Cam. I mean, Patrick Queen, hopefully Trenton Simpson comes in and replaces him. It all depends on how everybody plays, right? If Trenton Simpson doesn't come in and can replicate what PQ did, then obviously maybe there's a different conversation there. But, Kevin Zeitler, you would assume that hopefully a Ben Cleveland or another guy would be able to step up in that role. But I think McDonald, if Zach Orr comes and performs up to the level McDonald did, I think we're not talking about it as much, but at least in what we're thinking could happen, I think the biggest drop-off potential it's no disrespect to Zach Orr. It's just a matter of Orr not having the experience and it just being so uncertain. But it's uncertain with everybody, right? It's uncertain with what Patrick Queen is going to be able to do in Pittsburgh, what Trent Sims is going to be able to do to replace him in Baltimore. It's all just about uncertainties. So I would probably say yes, McDonald is the biggest loss for now, but we'll see how it all unfolds. I see, comp saying Van Noy was so underrated. What he did really well, not only from a pass rushing perspective, but also he was a great leader, and he was someone that could play a bunch of different roles. If they needed him to, he could have played inside linebacker, and I think if he comes back, he might actually play more of that role with Patrick Queen gone. But he also had the ability to drop back in coverage if needed, but he just looked really fresh and looked really rejuvenated, and he's someone that made a lot of big plays on the edge, was better in run support than a lot of people thought he was. Him and Clowney both returning would be an absolute godsend for Baltimore, and I think that's probably the role that I would want them in is, they're a year older and you got to maybe manage snaps a little more, but obviously, hopefully, Ajabo can come back and take away from that, plus Owe, hopefully with his full-time breakout. I see Cam saying Van Noy said on Twitter, he spoke to EDC about returning. Yeah, it has been a thing. And EDC, definitely has been on those phone lines. Harbaugh saying that he stayed in contact with them. So would not be shocked whatsoever if one of those two comes back. I think that one of those two should come back. And I don't know who I'd pick at this point. I think both were really valuable. It feels like Clowney's making those visits might be more into the money aspect of things, which again, I don't blame any player for wanting that, but I think maybe Van Noy is the more realistic option for them right now, but anything can happen as well. Baltimore get up saying trade 30 to New York for 47 and 70, moving back 17 spots, picking up 70. I'd want Baltimore get up. I'd argue I'd want another 2025 third in that deal too. Maybe a trade like 30 and a fifth for 47, 70 and a 2025 third or a 2025 second. Maybe I'm getting a little greedy, and I don't know how it lines up on the trade chart. I don't have it in front of me, but I think a trade back might honestly be a very interesting and maybe realistic scenario for the Ravens, considering when they get to 30, when the draft gets there, the Ravens are probably going to have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 prospects they would be okay with taking at 30. And then what you can do there is if you really want to, even if it's just getting 2025 capital, you can still move back 6 or 8 or 10 spots, and you'd have probably 2 or 3 guys left who you would have been fine taking at 30. You get them at, let's say, 35, and you can go there and maybe add extra draft. Baltimore get up saying I am being greedy. I have to be greedy, Baltimore get up. It's because I want those 2025. I feel like the 2025 capital you can add on to a deal. I always try to sneak it in there, and it is a little greedy, I know, but I do think the Ravens have a realistic shot to trade back as a deep offensive line class, deep wide receiver class, especially in those first 2 rounds before the fall off kind of happens. I think they definitely could do it. It's HD saying Roman Wilson in round 1. I think that for Baltimore, it's interesting with what they could do. I think Wilson's more of I don't know. I feel like he's I would be fine in a trade back for Roman Wilson. I'm not sure he's a first round guy, but I think that I'd have him more in the 2nd or 3rd round, in my opinion. I'm not necessarily putting him as a first-round grade. I'd rather have an Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, one of those guys, but we know the Michigan connection. Now, obviously, it's more so in the NFL with Jim Harbaugh being literally the Chargers head coach, but I'd be more okay with taking Roman Wilson in the second round or in the third round as opposed to him in the first personally. But I still like Roman Wilson as a prospect. I think if they were to take him there, I'd be fine. Not at 30, but in the second or third round. Cam saying Kyle Hamilton hasn't reached the ceiling yet. I could see Defensive Player of the Year in the next few years. I could see it too. I mean, he's a do-it-all player. He still is incredible, but I agree with you, Cam. Hasn't reached the ceiling yet. I think that Baltimore, and it's kind of weird how it all worked out because I feel like with the Ravens, the backstory behind it is Baltimore apparently, again, this has not been confirmed, so please don't take it as such, but they wanted a wide receiver in that first round because they had the agreement for Marquise Brown to move to Arizona, and they said, okay, fine, one of Drake London or Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, etc. And then all those guys went in a span of like 5 picks. And because of that, they got an all-world talent in Kyle Hamilton. And I think, look, if there was a pick between London and Hamilton or Williams and Hamilton, I would have taken Hamilton. But that's kind of where they were. And like, oh, they wanted a wide receiver. They were rumored to want a wide receiver. And then all the receivers got taken. But then Hamilton comes in and he's just been this beast for them. They didn't need a safety. That was the best player available pick. They ended up being able to move on from Chuck Clark because of it. They bring in Marcus Williams. They have a really quality safety room. But Hamilton, to me, is a really, really quality player. I see Terry saying only trade back if Coleman or Leggett isn't there. I think so. Leggett's getting first round buzz now. I see him going there. I see him going like Michael Pittman Jr., T. Higgins range, like very, very top of the second. A lot of people like Coleman. He could be available at 30. We'll see. But I think, you're talking about a Jalen Polk or Malachi Corey or Leggett or one of these players. There are a lot of options. You could even get like a Jermaine Burton in the third or fourth that I'd be okay with. But there are options day 1, day 2, and day 3 that I think Baltimore would be okay with. But now the option or the question you got to ask is the Ravens have invested a first-round pick in a wide receiver in 2019 in Marquise Brown, 2021 in Rashad Bateman, and 2023 in Zay Flowers. Are the Ravens going to be able to invest another pick in 2024 in another receiver? Now, Marquise Brown's not with the team anymore. Bateman hasn't lived up to the expectations that people have for him. So there are avenues for them to do it. But now the whole conversation is, do you take an offensive lineman? I personally would probably prefer offensive line over everybody in the first round, but it all depends on who's there. We could see a guy fall that we have no idea is falling, like Kyle Hamilton, and that's the dream. And then we're having a different conversation. I see it's HD saying I'm a Michigan fan, so I'm biased. I get it. On the mock draft I did for this morning, HD, I took Blake Corum in the 4th round, and people I feel like either love that pick or they hate that pick. I think if he's available at 113, I'd do it. I think first 3 rounds, I'm not a big running back fan. If Corum's available in the 4th, though, I think I would do it. See Terry saying Worthy doesn't fit. He's less of what they need. I think they need a bigger body jump ball receiver. So at this point, a Worthy who has the speed, but I mean, they have speedy guys. I'm not saying they're like Worthy fast, but Flowers is speedy and Bateman is underratedly speedy. So we're going to see how it goes. Baltimore get up saying Coleman and Leggett were being disrespected. And I got him at 40. You got Coleman at 47 or Leggett at 4? I got Leggett at 62 on the simulator. If you got Coleman at 47, that's crazy. I would make that trade up for Coleman. Terry saying Bateman walks. And a second-round offensive lineman can be starters. Don't understand the logic. Lamar needs top-notch weapons. I get it. I do. But I feel like, to me, I think you can still get a round 2 player and have them be a quality weapon for Lamar. That's not saying that the first-round wideouts aren't awesome, but I think that there are just so many good tackle prospects where you can make the argument where you can take a Keon Coleman and then go get a Patrick Paul in the second round. You can also make the argument you go take a Amarius Mims, and then you get a Jalen Polk. And either one I think is okay. Then a Rave 8 saying, I don't like the fact Ravens year after year, put stock into poor performing Bateman and depending on injured players. A job, but it doesn't seem like a good business sense. There's a balance. I agree here. There's a balance, then a Rave, that I think Baltimore has to employ. And I think they did a good job about it last year. They brought in the veterans like an Odell, like a Clowney, like a Van Noy, while also hoping other guys would produce. But I think what and I don't necessarily agree with this part of the philosophy, but I think this is what the philosophy is. The philosophy is that if veterans are taking away snaps, there's not as much developmental time. And I personally think there's a way to complement both veterans and younger players to put them in roles to both succeed as opposed to one taking away from the other. But I feel like we kind of saw a preview to this 2 years ago in 2022, or I guess last year, where The Ravens went all young. Bateman was their wide receiver 1. Duvernay was their 2. It was a disaster. I said they shouldn't have done it from the jump, and it was a disaster, much like I predicted. So I think, look, you added Josh Reynolds, you added Michael Gallup. That's not a guy who's challenging Rashad Bateman for the number 2 spot. That's a guy who complements Rashad Bateman. I would love it. Like, personally, I'd rather go out there and get a Cortland Sutton. And now Denver necessarily isn't trading him, but that type of a player, I think that's in the best interest of the Ravens. But we're going to see how it works out. Cam saying EDC been cooking in these drafts, hopefully later rounds. I was excited for the cornerback last year, Kaiu Blue Kelly. I think a lot of people were. It did not work out. Now, DaCosta has not had 5th round luck recently. 5th round luck, the Ben Mason, that did not work out. Sean Wade traded him. 5th round is Eric DaCosta's kryptonite for the most part. So hopefully there are a lot of 5th round gems for Eric DaCosta this year. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. I appreciate everybody tuning into this live edition of the show. We'll be right back here tomorrow, or if a move happens, we'll go live later tonight, talk about that. But we'll be right back here tomorrow if nothing else happens. Be sure to tune into our Monday episode. We did a mock draft for Mock Draft Monday. Be sure to subscribe, follow along, video form, audio form, 4 or 5 days a week, plus more Ravens content. I'll see you right back here tomorrow or soon on Locked On Ravens.